From your favorite source for Chicago White Sox talk, delivering news, interviews, analysis, and more. This is the Sox Machine Podcast with your hosts, Jim Margalus, James Fegan, and Josh Nelson.
Thanks, Rob, and welcome to a new episode of Sox Machine Live. I'm your host, Josh Nelson, and it's Leap Day. It's February 29th, 2024. This doesn't happen often for us in the Sox Machine Podcast. I don't think we've ever done a Leap Day podcast ever before, Jim. I think this might be our first Leap Day show in 11 seasons podcasting together.
And it feels so different.
Sure does. And of course, we're joined by James Fegan as well. And in this episode, we're going to be taking a look at the early spring training stats, because why not? Why not freak out a little bit on who's doing well? Like Eloy. Eloy's raking right now. Some guys not exactly hitting so well, and raises some questions that if they don't hit better, are they going to make the opening day roster? And Garrett Crochet makes his first start of spring training and impresses, especially striking out Shohei Ohtani looking in that start. We'll talk about those items in a moment, but first we're going to be talking about the MLB.com. A fascinating story was released looking at projected defense for this upcoming season. And the reason why it's so fascinating is where the White Sox rank. So as a reminder of just how bad things were last year, the Chicago White Sox, according to Fangraphs, were dead last in defense in Major League Baseball in 2023. Their defensive rating was minus 38.5. And according to MLB.com, looking at all the offseason moves that Chris Getz has made, a renewed focus on trying to get better defensively, the Chicago White Sox are projected to be plus 17, a 55.5 improvement on their defensive rating. And that puts them ninth projected in Major League Baseball. So the White Sox, at least on paper, are going to go from the worst in 2023, and now they are projected to have a top 10 defense coming into the 2024 season. So it begs the question, James Fegan, this was Chris Getz's strategy going into the offseason, kind of forced his hand after speaking to some free agents and them being very honest that I don't want to pitch for your team because the defense is horrible there. And he focused on trying to get guys in the offseason to help with that defense. So at least on paper, it seems that his strategy for this offseason has more merit than expected. Would you say the same?
Let me immediately come with two devil's advocate arguments, or perhaps just regular commentary arguments. One is that White Sox front office also made it very clear that the defensive first strategy was a lot cheaper, and that's why something they're able to execute with their slash payroll. And so that was kind of like, and it's cheap and it might work good too, as might have been the order of the reasoning. And another way to look at it was, I believe that both a former podcast co-host of mine back from some era where before civilization pointed out the Guardians and Twins are both rated above the White Sox in the same projection. That has everyone excited, so that the advantage that they might wreak out of it would be more or less being pursued more effectively by the main Guardians, that they're literal Guardians, the people guarding them from actually competing in the top of the division. So yes, it seems like their defense is better. That's nice. But I don't know if it necessarily, seeing that they might be in ninth place, was this big game changer that made me rethink everything about how I assess the franchise for 8 years running. But I don't know. Others could defer.
All right. So James is still dour about the White Sox defense and what it will mean for this upcoming season. Jim, what say you? Does this bring more merit to what Chris Getz was attempting to do this offseason?
I think the pro Getz argument would be that the White Sox didn't do anything well last year. And so they're looking for like any kind of strength, anything to build around, like a lot of like when you look at the White Sox individually, there are a lot of guys where you say, like, what do they do well? Like, what does Andrew Vaughn do well? He doesn't really do anything well. What does Eloy Jimenez do when he's not getting the ball off the ground? He's not doing anything well. So, like, you could, whether you're assessing it individually or as a team, this team had really no calling card. So in an attempt to give it one, even if it is the cheapest one, I can, see why in a year where they're just trying to change their identity, probably wait out Pedro Grifol a little bit because they might have to hold on to him, and there's no use burning a new manager in a team that's going to be overhauled anyway. You have a Dylan Cease maybe to trade. A lot of things still yet to happen. So if you're trying to kill time, this isn't necessarily the worst way to do it. I think my reservation with this is you're defining a team by what it doesn't do, or like what do you hope doesn't happen, which is like they don't make errors. They don't allow that many runs. They don't allow mistakes to compound. And like that's true. But if they don't do anything else, like if they're not going to score a lot of runs, if they're not going to like strike out a lot of guys or be overwhelming on the pitching side, you're basically putting a lot of stress on the defense to come through every time. And as we saw, like in the second spring training game where they had like two error sequences that just immediately brought back memories of, so many years before, immediately point and say like, well, I guess nothing's changed. And, they're allowed to screw up on one hand. On the other, once they screw up, where do they have to go? If they're not scoring runs, if they're not striking guys out, like they're putting all their eggs in this basket to where once some form of stress causes some crack in the balsa bridge, that it's all going to come tumbling down. So I think that's really the flaw in the plan, in my estimation, is that if somebody gets injured, if they have like, they're down 2 starting pitchers, if Eloy gets hurt again, all of a sudden you're seeing this day in and day out of just like, they better not make any mistake or the whole house of cards is going to come tumbling down. And we've seen that before, to where just like so delicately built to where they can't really afford any kind of either on-field mistake or setback to the roster.
So to follow up, Jim, are you coming on the perspective of like the White Sox being a contender this year in that argument? Because it sounds like, because from my perspective, right, Chris Getz is trying to change everything. And this is going to require baby steps. And the first step that he's willing to take is, let me improve the defense. Yes, we will address the offense. We will definitely need to address the pitching. But man, if free agent pitchers don't want to sign with me, no matter the quality of the starting pitcher, because the reputation of the Chicago White Sox is our defense is horrible and nobody wants to pitch for us, especially when you consider how the ball flies out of the ballpark, especially in the summer. Like, I understand when he shared that information, why he went in that direction, Jim. And he doesn't like this team. And I'm not even totally sold now that he believes that this team has much of a chance contending. So for me, in the mindset of, yeah, this team's not winning the American League Central, shows some improvement. And if you could show that you're better defensively, I can live with that. But it sounds like from your perspective, it's maybe a little bit more than that. Like, fingers crossed, hopeful that they could surprise in the AL Central.
No, I think it's just more along lines of like, they're trying to show competence, which is what they did not show last year. And, if you're not scoring runs and if you're not like acquiring name brand starting pitchers or pitchers who are going to project fantastically, and then they trade Dylan Cease, they're just putting so many eggs in the like that basket of just, we don't make mistakes. Well, what if you do? What if like you're held to 2 runs for 8 games in a row and every game is like, if you have the infield drawn in the third inning because you don't think you're going to score, those sort of pressures you put on the defense to be not just good and sound, but maybe spectacular to make up for an offense that's not scoring runs, making up for starting pitching that's only going 4 innings. That's what I think is the problem with building the team defense first. It's a lot like building the team bullpen first, which is what we just saw, which is just a very conservative approach of just like, well, if everything goes right, if as long as we have Kendall Graveman, Joe Kelly, and Liam Hendricks, we're not going to blow any lead we have. It's like, well, what if you don't get that many leads? Yeah. And so it's just basically you're applying that kind of methodology to the defense, which, to Getz's credit, is at least on the field the whole time. Whereas like with Kelly and Graveman and such, they're only in the field from the 7th inning on if there's a lead or if the leverage is appropriate. So like there is more merit to this, but I still think the pressures are the same to where like, if you never have the lead, if you're always playing from behind, there's only so much that defense is actually going to do to improve the product.
Okay, those are good points, Jim. And James, Matt poses this question, and this has been something swirling in my head as well. Matt wrote in the comments section, I get wanting to improve the defense, but how does it doing through signing old guys who won't be around long improve the long-term outlook of the team? And I guess that is an excellent question, James, because the article in MLB.com cites Max Stassi. Is Max Stassi here for long? Paul DeYoung, is he here for long? Nicky Lopez, is he here for long? Yohan Nakata is a good third baseman, or he can be. Is he here for long? The answers are maybe or probably not. So how much of what Getz is trying to do and what you heard down in Arizona is part of this new culture change that they're trying to implement, that the young guys could take away from the veterans playing really good defense to hopefully that they work on their craft when they're in the minor leagues. So when they get in the major leagues, they can continue this momentum of being a good defensive ball club.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is definitely culture-wise, or saying like, let's just show that we're going to emphasize this, and hoping it both rubs off, but also becomes part of their reputation long-term. Part of it is just trying to produce pitcher success stories. So you can say like, hey, Chris Flexen came here and didn't miss a bunch of bats and still did all right. You can too, and show like we've shown how much we care about defense here in some degree, and you're just trying to produce some reputation. I would definitely specify like the whole signing pitchers thing. Like there's a certain type of pitcher for which the defense is a concern. It's not like they have the 7-year out for Blake Snell and he's like, oh, I don't know, guys. I've heard things about the outfield. Like it's more like when you're shopping on this lower tier of trying to get NRIs that you want over other teams where the finances are pretty much the same, or you're trying to get the reclamation project 1-year signings, having a harder time maybe linking on the guy that's profile really clicks with that because he's like, well, of my pick of very similar offers, I think this is the better environment for me. I think that's more the shopping where they get affected and annoyed, and certainly like where the bulk of their shopping was this offseason, why it's a specific nuisance at this time, but it's not like this. I don't know if it'd be the reason they didn't get Zach Wheeler necessarily. So,
okay.
Who knows? But what was the original question? Long term. So one of the reasons I agree with the premise long term is that you're still facing kind of a near future where probably the most exciting hitting prospects in the organization that you're viewing to be your next core are fairly bat first. Like Coastal Montgomery, like even if it all works out, like he's a 6'5" shortstop. He's not like this is not like your typical Prowl that you scouted him for defense and it turns out that he takes pitches. Like this is sticking to that project is specifically like trying to jam this bat into where it'll produce the most value. Like Brian Ramos has done a lot of work to be a solid third baseman, but like definitely what we're excited as a plus part of his profile is the offense carrying the defense. I think Edgar Harrow, I think he could definitely become an average defensive catcher, but like he's not like this super athletic, like quick mover behind the plate where he's going to like be a Gold Glover. I don't think it's an offense first profile. You kind of have that a lot in what seems like your impact talent that's near Major League Ready that's supposed to be turning this around sooner than later. So how the standards that they're applying this year are going to like extend to that. I'm really curious because theoretically it should be like a far stricter grading curve for Montgomery being major league ready defensively than it probably would have been under the last administration. And let's see if they actually stick to that, because I think Colson Montgomery might force them away from this, at least expose some of the limitations of their commitment to this mindset.
I think the one area where like there's merit to this, or at least, where I think they really needed to communicate defense is like getting Gavin Sheets out of right field, getting Andrew Vaughn out of right field, like all first basemen.
He just hit his way back in the right field for good.
Yeah, maybe, perhaps. Yeah. But I mean, like for now, like having like Dominic Fletcher, Zach DeLoche, and Kevin Pillar all there to be like, no, we really don't want that to happen. Are there circumstances to where like it might happen for an inning or two or a half game? Sure. Can't rule it out, but just like, at least they've communicated that like the Rick Hahn, Kenny Williams mode of just like, when it comes to like any kind of defense on like outside of like up the middle is like, we'll figure it out, and just going nowhere with it, I think is really something worth communicating. And then we'll see like, should plan A, B, and C not work for right field, then I guess we could be back at square one. But I do appreciate that. I think more so than any other position on the diamond.
Running down the top 10 for MLB.com, number 1 are the Cleveland Guardians, plus 47. So a pretty big difference between the White Sox and the Guardians. The Chicago Cubs, we know that they're very strong, especially up the middle in the infield. And of course, having Pico Armstrong being the projected starting center fielder. And if he's not, bringing back Cody Bellinger, still strong up the middle. The Cubs at plus 35. And then you've got the teams that made it to the World Series last year, 3rd and 4th, the Diamondbacks and the Rangers. The Rockies are tied with the Rangers, the Yankees, Blue Jays. The Twins are ahead of the White Sox. But there was this note for MLB.com that there's a wide error bar when it comes to the Minnesota Twins, because there's so many ifs coming into this season, health-wise for the Minnesota Twins. And there are some serious questions about depth again. And they just got Manuel Margot, do they not, in a trade from the Dodgers? So it kind of raises questions again. How often is Byron Buxton going to play in center field again? So even though the Twins are ranked ahead of the White Sox at this moment on paper, there's some concern, at least the projection system, that it could be a wide range. If the Twins are healthy, they're going to be strong defensively. If the Twins are not healthy, that's going to be a problem for Minnesota in 2024. But with this entire conversation and watching spring training and White Sox fans looking for some hope in 2024, hoping to see a win improvement, James, is defense and run prevention alone good enough to see a 10+ win improvement in 2024?
10? Like I was more confident saying yes, they would improve, because like 101 losses is already like above like an extreme result for even like your garden variety awful team. I don't know. I'm tempted to say it'll be hard to get. I mean, they are in the Central, but if we're really talking about like a 10-win improvement, I feel like that has to involve some level of like Moncada, Vaughn, Jimenez, like outproducing last year by some meaningful, beyond one standard deviation, or so to speak. I think there would have to be a little bit more to their offense, or they're like just don't have the worst plate approach in baseball and worst plate discipline to really give themselves more of a chance to be regularly competitive that 72 wins or something would require.
How about you, Jim? Do you think run prevention alone is enough to win 10 more games?
Yeah, it's tough putting a number on it, just because it does feel a lot like 2017, where all it takes is 1 or 2 trades of the White Sox best players, like Dylan Cease's, like say Yoan Moncada, if he's part of like a first half to where the White Sox are okay, like just an ordinary form of below average, but like he looks like a 4-win player, like maybe he gets dealt, and all of a sudden like they're down Dylan Cease, they're down Moncada, who knows about Eloy, and then like they just have nothing again. And looking at the 2017 team, first half 38-49, second half 29-46. So I think that's kind of the split you could look at to where like they end up winning 65 games, but that's just because they might have been good enough if they stayed together to win like 74. But because things were clicking so well among players they didn't want to keep or saw more value in trading away, they kicked themselves down. So I can see, maybe a 10-win improvement, but I don't see much more than that, just because I think at that point things had to go very, very right to not inspire Chris Getz to trade guys who are responsible for that big improvement. So that's why I can see them just kind of being self-limiting or self-governing for just how good they can be.
Yeah, we did get that comment to back you up on that point, Jim, with White Sox Jet. Keep in mind, they wrote in the comment section, we are going to lose some wins after White Sox trade cease. 10 wins better than last year might be asking a lot.
I think they lost like 8 out of 9 after the Quintana trade in 2017 with some major league springing in the Goldberg to Clippard bridge at the end of the games in Kansas City. If memory recalls.
Yeah. Of course, Kansas City. Bullpen meltdowns. That's a great place to have them. If they're going to win 10 or more games without the offense improving from post-trade last year, and this is a reminder for the podcast listeners and those watching the live stream, after the trade deadline last year, the White Sox offense averaged 3.5 runs a game, despite how well Luis Robert was hitting. And on the run allowance side, they're allowing 5.7 runs per game. Like the 2.2 run difference is gigantic in Major League Baseball. So if they could drop that run allowance to 4.5, but if, to everyone's point, especially in the comments section, those watching in live stream are making, if the offense doesn't improve and they're still sputtering around averaging 3.5 runs per game, then I could see where everyone's right that, yeah, run prevention alone is not enough for a 10-win improvement, because even though they're only allowing 4.5 runs per game, they struggle to even score that many. So the offense, it's got to be a balance in order for the White Sox to see some win improvement from last year. And on that balance, maybe the White Sox are getting some good news because Eloy Jimenez is raking in spring training, and he had another big game today in the split squad action. And Eloy so far, again, it's very early. It's just 11 at bats, but Eloy's 7 for 11 to start spring training. No homers yet, but he's got 5 singles and 2 doubles, and he's driven in 6 so far. He hasn't walked, but he's only struck out once, so he's making a lot of contact early on in spring training. And Jim, when it comes to the White Sox offense and how they're going to improve from that 3.5 run average post-trade last year, Mark, I feel like there's a lot of pressure on Eloy, because I think after 3 seasons, we have a pretty good feeling who Andrew Vaughn is as a hitter. I don't know if we could ever count on Yohan Moncada posting 2019 numbers again, unless the super bouncy ball comes back. So we keep asking, like, who's going to help Luis Robert in this lineup? And the answer always circles back to Eloy, but we don't know what version of Eloy we're going to be watching this year. And is Eloy going to stay on the field? And I feel like there's a lot of pressure on him that he has to step up big time offensively if the White Sox have any chance of scoring 4 runs or more per game.
Yeah, he really is their best chance for instant offense, because like even, factoring in Luis Robert Jr. with how well he hit last year, he's still a little bit of a work in progress in terms of like figuring out like how much power can he naturally access versus selling out more. Can he like restore some of the average hitting that he did, like hitting for average, I should say. And, just his knowledge of the strike zone, tempering those like bursts of aggression that get him into like, a series wide slump. I think there's some moderation that, Robert has to figure out if he can do it. But otherwise, like, when you look at Jimenez and everything he's had to learn from so far in his career and his own hot and cold tendencies, like he is like the one guy who, we've talked about before, like, could he hit 40 homers? Like, seems like he should be able to, just based on his strength, his all fields power. Just more a matter of, can he get the ball in the air? Can he stay healthy? And those are probably connected in terms of like, is his lower half healthy enough to have the swing he wants and be able to elevate the way he wants to and get the barrel where it needs to be. So it's always the same question. And like with him, it's tough just because like watching him, and every time he has to run max effort, you think like, is he going to step on the bag weird? Is this going to set him back for a month based on how he follows through or like hits the brakes after first base? Like you always like wait for him just to come like hobbling back to the bag and looking towards a dugout. And I think that's really just the unpleasantries of watching him, is just waiting for that bad step to just undo all the progress he's made. So that's why I want to temper my enthusiasm, but it seems like, you know, based on natural abilities, based on the, you know, staffers the White Sox have that might be able to have some new ideas for him, based on maybe some motivations to change, based on the way like Chris Getz was shopping them around to see like if there are any interesting offers. Like his spot on the roster and in this franchise is not as secure and safe as it used to be. So like he's got some motivation too to maybe make some changes that maybe he wasn't open to making, figuring like, well, as soon as I'm healthy, everything's going to click.
Yeah, we did get this comment in the live stream from Mark. Mark wrote to us, I have no faith that Eloy will stay healthy. Even when healthy, he has not lifted the ball consistently. For me, he has to prove it over a period of time. And Mark makes some good points, James. And when you were at camp and the position players were showing up, I mean, that's two big questions with Eloy. One, what is he going to do differently to try to stay on the field? And two, what is he going to do to try to generate more lift in his swing? Did you hear anything when you were at camp on some of the adjustments that he or the White Sox coaching staff were planning for him to make for this upcoming season?
I mean, the primarily thing that they talked about was hand placement and setup and emphasizing contact point, which it's hard to kind of pin down how you emphasize contact point so much. Like it just could be him, an approach or a mindset and a swing that he's trying to catch things out in front and he's trying to think about pull side a bit more than he ever has. He's never been somebody who he was very rigorous in the minors about being up the middle, because he was someone who thought, you know, the thinking was that he hit for average so naturally, and he had so much raw strength that he could produce power even with kind of this all fields hitting for average approach, that emphasizing him to turn on things or look for balls to pull wasn't really the thing, because they didn't feel like he needed to be subject to the slumps that come with being pull happy if his skill set is so vast that he doesn't need to think that way. But maybe gearing him more to think about and have his approach more as just like a typical power hitter who's trying to maximize their power production. Maybe it's more realistic utilization of what he has at this point, when obviously his leg health has not been something that maybe seems conducive to being a 4 average hitter, or maybe it's just kind of facing the reality of, you know, what he was last year and how his effectiveness to really produce power against this level of pitching has been capped by not having a fly ball oriented approach. So right now, it seems like they're maybe under promising a little bit. They're emphasizing kind of simple fixes, but I think it'd be kind of a bit of a mindset change if he's really kind of leaning into, well, the implications of, you know, trying to get the ball in front would lead for him.
So to follow up, James, do you have faith or confidence that we could see a bounce back season from Eloy?
Faith from like an offensive standpoint, just like this is one of the most like talented and intuitive hitters I've ever seen. Even though his production has been nowhere near what I would have said watching him in the minors back in 2018, I don't think it's really diminished the idea that he's like very talented and has this potential for a superlative offensive season if all the things line up. Now, the thing that mainly lines up is health and kind of continuity and his leg base that allows him to drive the ball seemingly as much as he should. There's not like some new level of like optimism here, like not to dismiss the work of any of the training staff or all the work that's going into keeping him healthy, but like there's not some big concrete reason they've cited for why this is a better opportunity to keep him healthy, other than they won't play the outfield seemingly based on the roster. But it's really seems more like another spin at the wheel of hopefully this can be the healthy season where nothing crops up the boat in the base pass, because it seems like it hasn't just required him to play that much outfield for that stuff to crop up for him still at this point in his career. And he really didn't play much outfield in the second half of last year. So I don't know if there's a big physical reason to leap onto 150 games this year, but it's nice to hear him say it, be dedicated toward it.
Yeah, I mean, Jim, Eloy not playing defense, obviously he's going to hurt his WAR unless he really rakes. So I think the number for me looking forward to 2024 is that weighted runs created plus, or for those that like baseball reference, more OPS plus. Like, how is Eloy performing against league average? And if he's in like the 120s or higher, well, that's great for the White Sox because he is producing at a high level for them. Just depends on how many guys are on base ahead of him when he is batting. But if he's still like between like 95 and 105, yeah, that's not going to cut it. Like, if the White Sox are going to score more runs this year, I hate to put all this pressure at Eloy. Like, it's Eloy or bust, but that's what it kind of feels like, because I don't have a lot of confidence that we're going to see the Andrews make a big step forward offensively, and the Andrews, of course, being Benintendi and Vaughn. So I guess from my perspective, it really does feel like it's on Eloy to help out Luis Robert.
I was looking up Nelson Cruz just as like the first DH only like guy who's just there to hit, never expected to wear a glove, and he was consistently above 140. So I think that's kind of,
okay.
In terms of like at least OPS plus, I looked at that, which kind of, I think, matches for power hitter well enough when it comes like, whether it's WRC, WOBA, et cetera. But like along those lines, that's kind of what I'm thinking. Like he eventually has to get to be like somebody who's a fixture, like maybe not year in and year out the way Cruz was, because Cruz is like borderline Hall of Fame talent. I don't think he has like a Hall of Fame career, got started too late, but like the consistency he showed between like, ages 30 and 40 are Hall of Fame caliber. Like oftentimes that like 10-year section can be found in so many Hall of Fame profiles. So I think that's kind of what you have to find. Like even like a Travis Hafner or something like that, short-lived, like they were, 140, 150, like even if their bodies couldn't quite hold up. So I think like one of those two cases, if he's never going to be playing outfield in a meaningful way, like he has to start hitting like one of those guys, I think, to be, somebody who you build a lineup around versus like somebody who after this contract is up is more or less like a 1 or 2 year guy kind of floating around. Like, JD Martinez, I guess, would be another one along the same lines, but like Martinez accessed that 140, 150 OPS plus 40 homer type power. So I think these standards, as like defense becomes a non-existent part of his profile, like sure, like 120, 130, 450 games would be a good start. But I think like eventually in order to meet what he was expected to do, like he has to like set some kind of like, I guess plant some sort of flag when it comes to either his durability or his athleticism or just like well-roundedness to be able to offer something besides like power, because I think maybe that profile is not going to be one that teams are going to clamor for unless like they just treat him as an upside play for 1 year at a time.
This comment made me laugh from Michael. Eloy, Robert, and Mikata each have the goal of playing 150 games in 2024. The probability of me hitting big on the lottery is far greater. Yes,
it's a parlay, right?
Have you parlay them together? Big odds in your favor if they could all three do that. And I mean, if they perform well, maybe a couple of them will play 150 games, but maybe not all with the White Sox. Let's talk about who is cold. And James, I don't know if Kevin Pillar, if his status of the 26-man roster is in jeopardy, because the White Sox could use a dependable fourth outfielder, especially if Luis Robert were to get hurt mid-game, to have somebody that could quickly come off the bench and play competent defense. But Pillar's 1 for 11 with 7 strikeouts, and his bat looks slow in spring training games. If he doesn't hit this spring training, is he in danger of not making the opening day roster?
I mean, sure. Like if it's just the whole spring training of whiffing at a 60-70% clip, then yeah, I think that would that would factor in at some point. I would have to think. If you get up to like 30, 40 play appearances of looking like the equipment manager slipped on the field, then yes, I think it would be a concern. But as far as like a week of play, 3 games of at-bats, I think this is probably the time of year where they're like openly acknowledging that hitters are, I don't know if it's hitters behind pitchers, or you can twist it wherever you want, but like if he's just not timed up yet, I don't think we've reached a meaningful
sample size yet.
Size of time to say like this bat is cooked, get off, pack your stuff and get off the field. But yes, surely it's possible that, projected out over 5 weeks, that's a level of tanking Cactus League that would be problematic. I assume it's possible. I don't think I'm on the watch list yet, and I don't think it's really just how you have to look at a certain stretch near the end to say like I found my timing, especially 12, 13 years into his career. With the already the understanding of what he's here to do. I mean, if Eloy was like over 11 with 7 strikeouts, I imagine we'd be descending to a new level of spring training panic. But the level of identity, the identities of each players probably give them a certain different kind of grace.
Well, that's why I preface, because like Pilar's here to help with this whole defensive mindset for the White Sox. He's not here to be a big producer with the bat. Mike Moustakas is a different point, Jim, and Moustakas is starting slow as well. He's 1 for 11. So like to James's point, we'll check back in a couple of weeks. But in my mind, when they signed Mike Moustakas to that minor league contract, I'm thinking, yeah, he's going to make the 26-man roster. Pedro Grifol needs allies, James. What are you going to add?
Well, just like Moustakas is a funny person to transition to, because when they added him, where Daryl was asking Getz, like, first base, or you think he'll mix in some third? And like Getz literally said, like, let's just see where his bat is, and then we'll go from there. So it's like the polar opposite example of the player to let pick out.
Okay, so Kevin Pillar, not so much. You're saying Mike Moustakas very much. Like this is a concern if he doesn't start hitting.
He sounds like someone that maybe needs to show a little juice offensively to really stake a claim. I think if he goes like 5 for 60 for spring with like 30 strikeouts, and they're saying like, oh, we think he can give him some thunder off the bench, that would be a little bit more typical optic wise, but we'll see.
Okay, got it. So then I'll skip my Mike Moustakas question to you, Jim, unless you want to chime in on Moustakas and Pilar.
Well, like Moustakas, like if it just served the purpose of like letting Gavin Sheets know that like his spot isn't assured and he's stealing bases and hitting homers, like he's like challenging Luis Robert for a 40-40 run here, then I think, mission accomplished in terms of like, just not only are you blocked from right field, but you didn't hit well enough to carry a left-handed power bench bat profile backup first baseman either. So, if it served notice, and Sheets is, and I imagine Sheets is self-motivated already, realizing like his, OPS was, awful last year for somebody as large as he is, like that he needed to make improvements, but still like, just competition for these fringe spots where, to go back to the top of just like finding guys to try to do one thing well. And Sheets is one guy who did not do anything well. Any competition helps in that regard.
If I get managers of year vote again, I'll have to consider the way Grifol has lit a fire under Gavin Sheets in late February here in a way that's immediately turned up results.
Michael in the comment section posted this question to us. Realize it's early, but do you guys have a dark horse to make the opening day roster? I mean, on the pitching front, that should be pretty easy because as James is going to get into here in a moment, it might be who is alive at the end of spring training for the White Sox on who makes the opening day roster. But on the position player front, Jim, do you have a dark horse? Do you have someone that we haven't talked about yet that you think could make the opening day roster?
Not, I don't think, or I think the competition is so wide open that it's hard to feel like there's any real dark horse. It's more about like guys versus the field. If you're betting on them, like, I don't know if I would want to say like Danny Mendick is a great opportunity to make this roster. Like, I can see somebody besides Danny Mendick making the roster, but like, would I bet on any individual person besides Danny Mendick making the roster as like a utility infielder? I don't think so. I don't feel that, moved about like Lenine Sosa or Braden Shoemaker or anything like that, to where I think, that they're better. So to me, on the position player side, like, yeah, just right now, pretty open. None of the right fielders are really lighting up to where, like, there's somebody who's making that claim. Like, I don't see Zach DeLoach like leapfrogging Dominic Fletcher or anybody else to really make that move yet. So I think the order is the order right now. And as we established with just the likelihood of the front line of talent, and then like trying to build a bench around it, like I think the odds have remained largely the same, and that it's all kind of uninspiring.
James, do you have a dark horse for the position player side?
Position player side? Darn it. I was like,
yeah, I know you were ready for the pitcher.
I was entirely focused on the most ridiculous pitcher answer I could conjure. I literally was writing up a piece about Mendick for tomorrow that was like kind of just looking at the roster, like he's got to feel like this job is his a little bit. This isn't like it's very. It could easily be very cut and dry in the sense that it's a little bit dependent on their willingness to maybe open up 40-man spots, because maybe there's a vertical limit to that at some point. I feel like if you're adding both Mendick and Pilar, and then God knows how many relievers. So, I mean, I think, like, who's an actual dark horse? Like, at this point, is Gavin Sheets a dark horse? I think, like, sure, Deloach could have a big spring training, and like he's theoretically has nothing to prove at AAA. He's taken over 600 plate appearances at AAA, but also like that really isn't what I would bet on, given the fact that he has options remaining, and their hands are just not tied to try him out early. They can totally stall that out and like wait till there's a more sustained window of playing time to give it to him. So I don't know why I'd make it. Oscar Colas, dark horse, like
that would be one, I think. Based on all the rhetoric around him.
That would be wild.
In the sense that like they want him to operate under the idea, like if anybody on the team is gonna like embrace the whole like we're all competing for spots methodology, it's just the guy who literally wants spring to matter more than they have really said it matters for him, and he's just going to like the one thing Oscar Colas can definitely do is try too hard, which at spring, and probably clean up as a result of that. So I could see him having a max effort, very productive spring training, and some level of like, hey, we wanted people to earn their spots, and he did it. So that's the logic, the pretzel I've twisted myself in for dark horse, where the most major league ready prospect they had last year would now be a dark horse to make the roster this year. In a way I can see happening, I guess.
All right, so let's transition over to James Fegan's I'm not kidding. Dead report. No, update here on the pitching front for the White Sox. I know I joke. It's going to be whoever survives spring training. But it sounds like we're getting some more news. I mean, Jesse Scholtens is undergoing Tommy John surgery. That's the second White Sox pitcher already in spring training that needs Tommy John. What else are you hearing on the injury front on who might not be ready by opening day, James?
I mean, like the two people they've lost, like obviously Tommy John is a huge blow to their depth. Like not having Matt Foster being a realistic consideration for the bullpen is a blow to their depth that we probably don't think about because he's been out so long. But they hasn't necessarily lost anybody who was real competition to break camp from Tommy John. But Knebel was probably the most exciting, like, ceiling pick in the sense that he's been an all-star closer before. But, even before I came back last weekend, it was clear that he was going to be behind. And thus, if he's behind, it probably makes opening day less realistic. And not having an NRI that you have to put on your opening day roster is probably easier to deal with from a logistical standpoint. So coming off the shoulder surgery that they have, there's no realism else here. Based on what Scott Merkin reported today, it doesn't seem like that timetable is moving up anytime soon or looking geared towards being opening day ready. But Daryl Van Schouwen, the Sun-Times, reported that both Lambert shut down for 2 weeks with shoulder stuff, and Barlow was shut down indefinitely for shoulder stuff. Barlow being former closer for the Rangers, somebody who thought they could tick their velocity back up with some mechanical tweaks, and just has some major league experience more than most of the candidates in there. Really seemed like somebody that maybe you could see providing a solid average or above average major league relief season, and thus being a trade asset at the deadline for some sort of small flip if things click right with them. Now it sounds like, let's see if he pitches this year kind of situation.
Oh, great.
It's like, if he's being shut down indefinitely in spring, then you're in a battle to actually figure out what the timeline is. And then what does it look like if it's shoulder stuff after that? Like, it quickly accelerates to how much that he can really be a factor if shoulder stuff is cropping up this spring. Not that I've heard that he's out for the year or anything like that. I'm just logically mapping it out of it's hard to necessarily pin him down as like counting him for innings at this point. You have to see how things shake out.
All right. So promising. It's a great question. Like, who's a dark horse who's going to be making the roster on the position player side?
Let me rephrase this. Barlow was ineffective last year to the point where getting like DFA to being in AAA. So you're looking for him to be sharp coming to the camp. For him to be shut down indefinitely with shoulder issues makes it seem like it's going to be this very long bridge. So you're actually seeing like how effective they can get him up to be, to where, how long into the season is that, and how does he crack into the mix becomes very hard to project.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm making a joke, Jake, 'cause it's like every week now. It's like, hey, all these NRI, all these veteran guys that they signed, maybe they can help bolster the bullpen. It's like, who's going to survive?
I was looking forward to like a July confrontation with Barlow in my mind, where it's like, it's become like, I heard you said on a podcast I was dead, like sort of. It's like, no, I was just talking about indefinite roster spot.
Yeah. No, I was going to bring it up. It's like the better question is, who's closing games for this team, Jim, going into the season? Because people are going to be drafting fantasy baseball teams pretty soon. I don't know if you would want the White Sox closer anyways.
Well, yeah. I mean, like, what was the team leading total? 8 last year?
Did someone get to 10? I thought we had that conversation. Nobody got to 10?
Kendall Graveman got 8.
Kendall Graveman got 8. That's right. Graveman led the team.
Santos had 5.
Yes.
And based on like Griffol's very almost like postmodern concept of the bullpen, and just the idea of like what a closer should be, like, if he was willing to experiment that much with like Reynaldo Lopez early in the year when there were actual stakes, I can see him just being like, yeah, I don't really care who the closer is this week. Let's just go nuts. Let's treat it like a series by series basis, or by who's available. And I can really see it spreading out. So yeah, it's kind of wide open. And like just looking at like, Jesse Chavez got hit pretty hard with his first, bounced back nicely. So at least so that's why like these sample sizes are small enough to where like, one bad outing necessarily doesn't bury him, because like, as we saw with like Barlow being out, Lambert, who would have been a lock otherwise because of his option situation, like if he's out, then all of a sudden, like, more spots are open, or if like there's a reason to slow play him to maybe hold on to a non-roster guy they like and not have to make a decision on Lambert, like that kind of incentivizes them to be like, let's take it a bit slower. It's a long season. No need to rush Jimmy back into this, that they can maybe get a few weeks of a guy who might not have had a spot otherwise.
As in rec in the comment section, if Brian Shaw pitches 140 games this year, maybe he saves 15.
I forgot the detail of Brebbia being in the whole walking boot thing. So that adds a little of uncertainty to the thing.
Yep.
Yeah. How's my guy doing? I need him to get one save opportunity so I could hear wham.
Well, he's not supposed to be in a game for I think another 2 weeks. But he's throwing. So
okay, with the boot. I'm sure that's effective.
From a folding chair.
I mean, like in between when he has to walk around.
Yeah.
Got it. Got it. All right. So that brings me to the last topic that we could chime on here. Maybe he'll be the closer for the White Sox, though that doesn't really seem the plan. That's Garrett Crochet. He made his first start of spring training against the Los Angeles Dodgers, Jim. A very tough test. And the highlight is Crochet just freezing Shohei Ohtani with a fastball right down the pipe for a strikeout. Now, Ohtani of course, grabbed all the headlines and the highlights because he hit a home run in his third plate appearance of that game. But you wrote on SoxMachine.com about Crochet's first start in spring, Jim. What did you like seeing Crochet, even though it's a small sample size of an inning and 2/3?
Well, I like that he went from being like, oh, I don't know if I'll get my old velocity back. I might be a mid-90s guy, and I might have to, I really have to worry about my breaking ball. And he's throwing like 97, 99, 100 in his first inning back. And, confusing the scouting reports. Maybe it's under-promising and over-delivering, or adrenaline, or maybe just the fresh arm that he talked about having during his Tennessee draft year, like the canceled season, and then basically having all of that run-up time to get into a real game that counted. And then he had the peak velocity. Maybe it's something similar here, but the fastball was back, at least for one game. And so I don't know what to make of that. Is that back? Is that a one game thing? If so, I guess I would say the slider didn't look that great. And I think he's still trying to figure out what his breaking ball looks like. But when he's throwing 100, it takes the stress off all the other stuff. And when he's throwing 96, that really highlights the work that he needs to do to make his slider a weapon. So I think we saw the duality of Crochet in terms of what he has been and what he currently is, and trying to figure out what he will be from here.
What are you looking for, James, in future appearances from Crochet after speaking with him at spring training, and to gauge on how much progress that he's making? Because I know we've had this conversation. We're not very high on Crochet being a starting pitcher for the White Sox on opening day, but he's hoping to demonstrate that he could take on multiple innings of work. And what does he need to show you in spring training to give you a little bit more confidence that he's ready for that type of workload?
I think that his interview should more perfectly foreshadow exactly how he's going to look like. If he could just say actually, I'm feeling pretty good. It's going to be 97, 99, maybe a hot gun will put 100. But that's where I'm at for sure. I would appreciate that, rather than there's, the future is unknowable, and projecting specific statistics on how I physically feel is folly. And how could I possibly say it? All those excuses that athletes always use. I'm done with them. But I think the thing that he would say is that he needs to land secondaries more consistently, because I think even just kind of a one turn through the order, we saw him having to really power up to get through some of those situations, and maybe not getting through things as efficiently as he would need to be a 5 to 6 inning option. I think he even said that he only really got to throw one changeup, and that's something he probably, even in a removed world, will have to throw 10 times a game and get use out of it a decent amount. So, and beyond just, maybe seeing if the cutter is actually something that he faced a lot of left-handers in that order, so he's able to kind of attack them the way he did his reliever very often, and was overpowering doing it. But I guess I'd want to see him face more right-handers and be able to show that he can land that slider on the inner half of the plate and do things to get inside on right-handers that take the weight a little bit off the velocity, even if velocity is there.
All right. So you were doing some quick research when we were asking a dark horse to make it the team. Out of those guys that are pitching right now in spring training, who are some names that you think that White Sox fans should pay attention to, how they're progressing in these games early, because they may have a serious shot of making the opening day roster, being part of the White Sox bullpen?
I mean, if Spieth is overpowering, and Spieth is overpowering. If Spieth is in the zone, that gives you a guy who has kind of this high level stuff that maybe offers more ceiling than some of their other options. So he'd be something where if I think man, he's really throwing a lot of strikes, not necessarily just getting out of innings, but is locating or seems mechanically synced up, that probably he's kind of a high risk guy in terms of what he's going to look like in a given day. But if he's in the zone, I think he has a chance to be kind of a fun reliever in a way that allows him to make the team out of camp. The maximum obscurity and the weird backstory I was going to go with was Jake Cousins. And I had to look that up again because I'm always tempted to call him Scott Cousins, but really that's just the person who took away plate blocking from us. So future generations won't be able to appreciate human car crashes and the way that we did growing up. But just because he was someone that, like the baseball reason is that he's been someone who talked about that the White Sox recommended like seam shift wake as something he could utilize, which is like the first time I ever heard like seam shift wake said in a White Sox clubhouse before. And it would just be intriguing what that looks like, since he's been kind of this big stuff guy that like it was really something that they thought might help him command the ball and be in the zone. Since he's someone who's struggled with walks and control like his entire career. It'd be fun if it magically unlocks something in this way we haven't seen guys unlock stuff in the town. But really, my real theory was it's a difficult time for the White Sox. They're trying to convince the fans to have a connection with them to commit tax revenue or hotel taxes to them indefinitely. They're trying to get people back out to the ballpark. What more would re-inspire the entire city than having one of Park Ridge own Jake Cousins on the White Sox?
Yeah.
Surely the entire suburban population would mob to the stadium to see their prodigal son return. So that'd be my reason why he would be someone to watch.
So Jake Cousins would be Park Ridge. Nicky Lopez is Naperville. Paul DeYoung's from the area too, isn't
Antioch.
he? Antioch. And all those Illinois State alums. Yeah, make your way down. Support your guys. Seam shift wake. You want to quickly describe what that is, James? Because this is a pretty popular term, pitching terminology right now when it comes to development, not just to the majors, but like all the way through even to prep pitchers as well. This is something that they're starting to focus on with their coaching.
I'm probably not very good at defining it, other than like it's affecting the seams in the way to change the movement path from what your eyes would perceive as like the natural way. So I'm gonna have to watch that freaking video again about explaining it, but it's a way to like add a different level of like unexpected run and moving on pitches, and that's atypical from just like seeing the spin or the spin direction and guessing where it's going to be. So it's not something I've had to talk to players a lot about around these parts. So I didn't learn it as well as probably Saad of Sharma did. But it'd be cool if it became a factor in getting guys in zone and embracing kind of the run on their pitches.
With Brian Bannister into the fold, we're now going to have to like catch up to all these fancy terms and the forefront of what teams are doing on the pitching front. Because the White Sox have always been like trying to play catch up because they've been more old school. But it warms my heart to hear that, because I'm not very familiar with the gym, but this is something I keep hearing, like especially when watching college baseball games. Arkansas's pitching coach has been focusing on it. Wake Forest has been focusing on it as well. And reading prep reports, there are some scouts and the prep sites that are mentioning this phrase, even for like 15 and 16-year-olds now, looking ahead to the MLB draft. So it'd be kind of fun to do some research and provide that knowledge to White Sox fans that may not be very familiar in this term that's being more popular.
It kind of reminds me of when Theo Epstein took over the Cubs, and that was around the time where like there were some, I guess the wall between bloggers and the media was starting to fall, but you still had like some old media types who were like, wins above replacement. What's that? War? What is it good for? Ha, 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 ha. And then Epstein takes over, and then you have like, Bruce Levine and Dave Van Dyke and such asking him like, so wins above replacement. That's pretty important, huh? And I'm just thinking like he's probably has 5 billion other metrics that they use internally that nobody knows about yet, and it's just starting to but just like kind of had to indulge those questions. So I imagine like when it comes to seam shifted wake, it'll be kind of a similar divide between like people translating on the outside versus what they're actually doing with the information on the inside. I just want to see like if we get a Jake Cousins bullpen, will Josemar Kazin join him, because then you could have Cousins kind of like remind me of when the White Sox back in the aughts had Jose Valentin and Joe Valentine in the system at the same time, and thinking like, oh, just, it's just a nice little English to Spanish translation, or like, the Simpsons reference, non-union Mexican equivalent, which is what jumped out to me. But yeah, it's kind of along the same lines, except it would be Cuban in this case.
They've both had them like both listed on the same day to throw aside, and so their name is right together. But Chuck Garfien had like some he got crossed up and saw that Josemar Cousin was on like the list to pitch in the spring opener, and definitely went up to Jake Cousins and said like, "So you're pitching in the opener," and confused Jake Cousins for like 3 minutes. So what you're anticipating, it occurred as you do think.
Awesome.
Well, that will do it for this episode of Sox Machine Live. For those that watched the live stream on youtube.com/Sox Machine, thank you guys so much for watching the live stream. For those that are listening to the podcast feed, we appreciate you guys as well. If you want to get a chance, you could watch this live on youtube.com/Sox Machine or at soxmachine.com, but we always upload the audio recording into our podcast feed in case that you missed it. A couple of announcements. One, we still have our live podcast that we're going to be doing at the Remova Theater on March 27th. It's opening day eve, along with our friends from the 108. We're going to have some special guests. We're going to be making that announcement soon of who will be joining us to get ready to go for 2024 regular season. Tickets are just $22. You can buy them at removachicago.com. They'll be $25 the day of. Again, that is Wednesday, March 27th. Doors open at 7 o'clock, and the show will start at 8 o'clock at night. And of course, a huge thank you to our Patreon supporters. For those that have signed up recently at patreon.com/Sox Machine, we are inching closer to our second milestone. That will make it easier for us and affordable for us to send James out on the road covering the Chicago White Sox. If you are not supporting us on Patreon and you want full access to our White Sox content, it's just $5 a month. You go to patreon.com/Sox Machine. We have additional tiers, so if you want more, you get more from us. We have a $10, $25 tier. We also have our Veterans Committee, which they serve as our board of directors for Sox Machine, and they're part of our group chat, and they have direct access to James Fegan's hooligans and shenanigans and all the fun stuff that he loves to not put on the record that he texts to the group chat. So if you're interested in that, you can reach out to us again at patreon.com/Sox Machine. And again, you can subscribe to the Sox Machine podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, such as Spotify and Apple Music. And for those that do watch our videos, such as like our 2024 MLB draft coverage, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Sox Machine. Sox Machine Live is a production of SoxMachine.com. You're on for all things Chicago White Sox baseball and part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network. Alongside Jim Margalus and James Fegan, I'm Josh Nelson. Thanks for watching and listening.